So, folks, I'm here with Howie Hawkins, and Howie Hawkins is the front runner for the nomination of the Green Party for presidency of the United States. It's really an honor to speak with you, Howie. I'm glad you took the time to talk to us. I want to, just kind of introduce you to my viewers. You're running for president as a Green Party candidate. You've run for governor of New York many times. Before we get into politics, you have quite an interesting life story. I understand you were in the U.S. military. You're a Teamster brother. You went to Dartmouth College. Can you tell us a little bit about yourself and how you came to be a national political figure?
Well, I got started in activism really as a child, going into elementary school. My cousins, who are the children of one of the first Japanese war brats, were stationed in Virginia. They were Army brats. And I had another set of cousins in Virginia. They were white. And the Asian cousins were going to be sent to the colored schools and my white cousins to the white schools. And I'm thinking, that's stupid. That's crazy. It's wrong. And they ended up getting sent to Germany before they got into school in Virginia. But I got to school and they had us diving under our desks, putting our hands over our heads, in case of nuclear weapons. And I'm thinking, man, the adults don't have things under control. And then in '64, Reagan was campaigning against the fair housing law in California. I'm 12 years old now, and they got it repealed by referendum. He was doing that for the Republicans, so I looked at the Democrats. Instead of seating the Mississippi Freedom Democratic delegation, they sat the old segregationist Dixiecrats. So I'm asking at 12 years old, where's my party? And I learned John Lewis, speaking on behalf of the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee, had asked the same question the year before at the March on Washington for Jobs and Freedom. So I started to get active. I'm coming up in the San Francisco Bay Area, and we had civil rights movement, and the anti-war movement kicked off after Johnson got elected and escalated. And I got involved. And at that time, I became committed to an independent party, committed to what we call participatory democracy, democratic socialism, and ecology, which in the Bay Area was, I think we were on the leading edge of that question. And so I've been involved ever since. I went to the first National Green Party meeting in 1984 and said, we can't build a party out of a presidential campaign. We've seen that tried with Peace and Freedom in '68, People's Party 72 and 76, and the Citizens Party in 1980. We had to organize local groups and build from the bottom up, which we did, in the Green Party. And by the time Ralph Nader was ready to run, we could get him on most of the state ballots, and that put us on the national map. So that's how I got into politics. I mean, I was a construction worker and a Teamster to pay the rent, but I've really been an activist and involved in a lot of movements, anti-nuclear movement, the anti-apartheid movement, labor issues. And so by the time it got to the 2000s, the Greens turned to me and said, run for governor. They ran me 3 times. Each time we got enough votes to get on the ballot. We got 5% in 2014, which Governor Cuomo, who wanted to run up the vote to get ready for run for president, he got less than his father ever got, than he got in 2010 when he was first elected. So we had to look at what we were saying. We were saying ban fracking, $15 minimum wage, paid family leave. And Cuomo, who had never supported those things, turned around and supported them because we couldn't be taken for granted. He had to compete for our votes. So you mentioned Dartmouth College and being in the Marine Corps. The Marine Corps, my draft number came up, I enlisted. We had a GI movement against the war then. And so people like Daniel Ellsberg had come out of the Marine Corps. So I figured there were some interesting people in there. Smedley Butler, way back. David Shoup, who had been the commandant, came out against the Vietnam War. And he was asked to be the Joint Chiefs of Staff under Kennedy, and he said no, because he didn't like what was going on in Vietnam. So I thought maybe the Marine Corps would be an interesting place to be, and it was. And Dartmouth College, got a great education, but I went into construction because we were building solar and wind, what we call green jobs, in a worker co-op when I came out of college. That just appealed to me a lot more than sitting behind a desk writing memos.
Okay. Well, let me ask you, there's all kinds of people throughout the United States that are progressive, that are angry with Donald Trump and his tax cuts for the rich, don't like his lifting of environmental regulations, think Donald Trump is just leading the country in the wrong direction. Why should they vote for you and not Joe Biden?
Because Joe Biden is invisible. Trump is so inept in this coronavirus crisis. I mean, we're 5% of the world's population. We have 30% of the deaths. And the way we're going to increase that percentage. We're a failed state when it comes to the coronavirus crisis. The economy is flat on its back, and they've helped bail out big business, but working people, small businesses are getting killed. They're going out of business. Half the jobs are with small business. Where are those jobs going to be? So, and Biden has the megaphone, he has the platform, and he's invisible. There's no direction coming from the Democrats, let alone the Republicans. So it's an opportunity for the Greens to step up and, point the direction where we got to go, the kind of demands we got to raise, and hopefully mobilize people, not just when the election comes, but before and after.
Well, one thing that disturbed me about Joe Biden is in his article for Foreign Affairs magazine, where he was making his case, America must lead again, why he should be president, not Trump. He really emphasized a call for what sounded like tech censorship to me. He was talking about disinformation and the need for social media companies to crack down. And that seems to have affected you personally. Your Twitter page was taken down by Twitter, wasn't it? Right. And so it concerns me that kind of thing will happen if Biden gets elected. There'll be more censorship. Can you talk about what happened to you and your concerns about possibly these kind of things?
Well, yeah, Twitter took down my presidential campaign Twitter account saying I was impersonating myself, which I don't even know how to do. Mm-hmm. And then they put it up with no more explanation than that. It was a 2-sentence letter. And they always sign off, thanks, Twitter. So I don't even quite know what happened there. But it was disturbing because for a grassroots campaign like ours, social media is kind of the level playing field. And when we're excluded, that hurts. And one of the consequences of the Democratic Party narrative around Russiagate is that they've escalated the Cold War with Russia. They're saying we need to censor the internet to get rid of disinformation. But, who censors the censors? That's the problem. And I think disinformation is the problem. The Bulletin of the Atomic Scientists, when they moved their doomsday clock the closest it's ever been to midnight because there's no action on climate change, the nuclear arms race is out of control. And they also said cyber warfare. Publics are so confused about what's really going on, they can't formulate coherent demands to make to their governments to try to get some solution to these problems. So that's a real issue. But you don't give the state the power to say who can say what. Mm-hmm. And we've lost net neutrality. So these tech companies can put the viewpoints they favor higher up when you do the searches. That's a big problem. So we need a whole reform program around media democracy. And I think that will involve some trust busting, break up these platforms, go back to the rules we used to have in this country where you couldn't cross-own radio stations, newspapers, and TV stations in the same town or own, vast networks across the country. We should have more independent ownership. And I also think some of the platforms are natural monopolies. Everybody wants to be on the platform, everybody's on. So they tend to be monopolies. And monopolies is the classic case where you want public ownership. So they operate at cost for public benefit rather than for private profit. And then finally, I think we need to fund investigative journalists that are publicly funded but independent of the state. So you have boards maybe selected by sortition. New Jersey has a little experiment in that. And I think we need that because our newspapers with the social media, they're not getting advertising revenue. So they've been cutting reporters. So a lot of places don't have a local newspaper even to tell them what's going on in City Hall. So it's a huge issue. But Biden's saying, the state is going to decide what's legitimate information. Trump tries to do the same thing, with his, calling a lot of the media fake news. And that's a problem because then people think they can't trust anything. And that's exactly what the Bulletin of the Atomic Scientists was worried about. Okay.
Now, you are the father of the Green New Deal, right? I mean, that was your talking point when you ran for governor of New York, you and other Green Party candidates. But how is your vision of the Green New Deal different from what a lot of the Democrats are putting forward now?
Yeah, I was the first candidate in this country to label the program I was putting forward the Green New Deal in 2010 when I ran for governor of New York. Mm-hmm. But I picked it up from the Green Party of England and Wales, and then it was picked up by the European Greens. That was 2008, 2009. But it's something I've been talking about since we were involved in the anti-nuclear movement in the 70s. And we had a platform plank in one of the Green Party's platforms calling for, they didn't want to call it New Deal, so we called it the Global Green Deal. So these ideas have been around that we need to transform our economy to clean energy to deal with the climate crisis. And we need to have an economic bill of rights as part of that Green New Deal so that we can end poverty and economic despair. And one of the big issues, I think, is that with growing inequality over the last 45 years in this country, working class life expectancies are declining. It's unheard of in modern societies, except for Russia when they, transformed from the Soviet Union to the Russian Federation and had some real economic problems. Well, we got them here now. And so that's what the Economic Bill of Rights is for. So the problem with the Democratic Green New Deal is that they took the brand, which had been the signature issue of the Green Party. I mean, Jill Stein, our presidential candidate, her theme, both of her campaigns, 2012 and 2016, was a Green New Deal for America. That was our signature issue. They took the brand and diluted the content. So by the time this non-binding resolution was introduced by Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez and Ed Markey into Congress, they dropped important parts of it, like the ban on fracking and new fossil fuel infrastructure, like deep cuts in military spending to help fund the Green New Deal. And they extended the deadline to zero to negative greenhouse gas emissions and 100% clean energy from 2030 to 2050. So one of the reasons we're running is to get back to the full strength Green New Deal the Green Party's been championing the last decade.
Well, you're absolutely an environmentalist, Howie. But what I think is interesting is, there's a big debate around this new Michael Moore movie, Planet of the Humans. I guess he produced it. And it seems like a lot of the voices in the environmental movement, or a lot of the big funders of it, might think that the human life expectancy dropping is a good thing because the problem is overpopulation. There's just too many people. I mean, does it concern you that the environmental movement is dominated by Malthusian voices rather than socialist voices like yourself?
I don't think it's dominated by Malthusians. There is a wing, and that, and they are misanthropes. They're anti-humanists. Mm-hmm. And then there's a sort of the middle of the road wing that's funded, we call it the nonprofit industrial complex, and they get compromised, like the Sierra Club when they had their Beyond Coal campaign, which was natural gas as the bridge to the renewable future. They were getting funds from the industry, so they were compromised. And then the more militant, principled environmentalists, not all of them are socialists, but, like we were saying here in New York in 2008, we don't need a moratorium on fracking, we need a ban, because it's not even only a threat to the water. And these, royalty agreements that the companies are offering to landowners were really problematic, but it's a climate threat. So I haven't seen the film. Actually, I watched the first 36 minutes last night and had to go to bed. So I plan to finish, viewing it and probably write a review. Okay. But I really not prepared to comment on that film. But the general issue you raised is, we call it greenwashing. It's been a problem, since the 70s when we were, first going to these issues. There's always somebody like the anti-nuclear industry would get somebody who called themselves an environmentalist say why nuclear power was the solution.
Well, let me ask you, why isn't nuclear power the solution? It's not fossil fuels, right? It could be done in a more efficient way. People looking ahead to fusion energy, a more efficient version of it. Why not? Why not?
Well, you have the danger of catastrophic accidents, which we've seen in Chernobyl and Fukushima. We've come very close in this country, the Fermi reactor in Detroit, 3 Mile Island. So that's always a danger. You have the radioactive waste. We still don't know where to put it. It has to be sequestered for hundreds of thousands of years. So that's a big problem. You have leakages of radioactivity. And it does use, a lot of carbon to build the thing. They have backup generators using fossil fuels to run the nuclear power plant. So it's not actually carbon free. And it's expensive. I mean, that's the most unsuccessful industry we've ever seen. The insurance industry won't insure it because of the danger of accidents. So we have the Price-Anderson Act, a huge public subsidy. And today they're shutting down because they can't compete with other sources of energy, including wind and solar. So that would be a big diversion from the investments we need to make in the clean renewables.
Are you for more government funding of research into better forms of energy, like fusion power, for example?
I think fusion there should be some money put into it just for scientific reasons. But this goes back to the 50s. They've been trying, half a century, they still don't have a fusion reactor that we can use.
Mm.
So I don't think we should put many of our eggs in that basket. From the point of view of physics and engineering, it's probably worth putting some money in. But we have all we need from the solar reactor in the sky, the sun, and we just need to harness that energy, which is all around us.
Okay. Now let me ask you also, transitioning kind of to another topic. You call yourself a socialist. And you actually, I understand you've gotten the endorsement of the Socialist Party in addition to your support among the Greens. Can you talk about what socialism means to you? What kind of socialist you are?
Well, I'm a democratic ecological socialist. And to me, socialism means economic democracy based on social ownership and democratic administration of the major means of production. It means workers get the full fruit of their labor. What we got under capitalism, under the wage labor system, is you get a fixed wage, and no matter how hard you work or how much you slack, that's all you get. And whatever surplus value you create is taken by the owners of those means of production. So we should have social ownership in large scale production. And so it's basically making sure we have a more equitable distribution based on people working, instead of having so much of our income now going to people, it's unearned income because they own capital assets. And in fact, the tax system now is so regressive that if you had state, local, and federal taxes, labor income is taxed higher than capital income. So, in a socialist society, we change that. So I think the other thing that, Bernie Sanders emphasizes, you have social supports, an economic bill of rights, like I was talking about earlier. So, that's what socialism means to me. Economic democracy, workers get the full fruit of their labor, and we have the kind of social programs we need to have a civilized society.
And let me ask you also, Bernie Sanders is, a major political figure. He's lining up behind Biden. And I understand you actually have a long history with Bernie Sanders, and you were part of the founding of Democratic Socialists of America, from what I understand. Is that correct, or am I?
No, the old Socialist Party of America split three ways. Bernie was in the Young People's Socialist League in the 60s. Okay. I came in 1973. The old party split three ways over the Vietnam War. One faction was pro-war, one was sitting on the fence. Their descendants is DSA. And then the Socialist Party USA was the Debs caucus that was against the war and also for independent politics. The other two factions were for going into the Democratic Party. So I became a member soon after the Socialist Party USA was founded. And I've been a member all along. They've been pretty minor. I've been more active in the Green Party, but they did ask me to seek their nomination, and I won it. And I'm proud to be carrying forward the tradition of Debsian socialism in this country. Yeah. So yeah, DSA was. It's more interesting now than it used to be. They have a much broader spectrum. A lot of people from independent politics, a lot of people more socialist than New Deal liberalism, which is really what Bernie Sanders was running on. So now I've known Bernie since 1972. He ran for senator in a special election in Vermont in the spring, and then he ran for governor in the fall with the Liberty Union Party. And I dropped leaflets for him, and saw him at a couple campaign events. Then when he left the Liberty Union Party, he put together a slideshow on Eugene Debs, which I arranged showings of. And when he was elected mayor of Burlington, sometimes we were on opposite sides of some development issues. I lived about 90 miles away, but there was a Green Party up there, and I worked with them and on some peace conversion issues. So, that's my experience with Bernie. I haven't seen him in a long time. I think he'd recognize me, but I'm not sure.
Okay. Well, it was interesting. I did a story during the time when Bernie was still in the race, because it seemed like out of nowhere, there was just this huge media campaign against Bernie, alleging that he was tied to Cuba, quoting him, statements he made about Cuba, about Nicaragua. We saw that rant from Chris Matthews where he started talking about executions in Central Park. But if you look into the history, I understand that Bernie Sanders was a delegate for the Socialist Workers' Party, or he was an elector for them, and that they had actually sued the FBI for its involvement in kind of messing with the socialist movement, framing up socialists, working to keep socialists out of office. Do you feel like there was a deep state grudge against Bernie Sanders? Do you think that they had him tagged as a foreign asset or something, and that's why they came down on him so hard?
I don't think it was that deep. I mean, Chris Matthews ain't that deep. he can't even tell the difference between democratic socialism and, old Stalinist communism. And if he didn't know the difference, he's ignorant. If he did know the difference, that was a smear on Bernie Sanders. And, that's what you get from, I call it the corporate state media. And, you have these big corporations, only these media conglomerates, about 6 of them own most of the media we have in this country. So that's a big problem. Bernie was an elector for the Socialist Working Party candidate. I forget the year, maybe 1980 or 76. But he was never a member of that party. He hadn't been a member of a party since he left the Liberty Union Party after the 76 campaign. So I think, those were smears, and it was coming from the establishment, the corporate liberals and neoliberals of the Democratic Party. They didn't want Bernie. The way the Democratic Party uses progressives is they want them to make speeches. They're happy for them to make speeches because it attracts progressives into the Democratic Party, where the corporate wing makes the decisions, and because the progressives are locked in there, they can be taken for granted. So I think what happened to him was was an attack.
Well, it's interesting. It appears to me a lot of people are looking at the Joe Biden nomination and going, what in the world is going on here? I mean, we've now got the sexual allegations, but before that, I mean, there's been many clips where he forgets what he's talking about. He says racially inappropriate things. Why is the Democratic Party nominating Joe Biden? I mean, what is going through their mind? I mean, he seems to just be an incompetent candidate.
Well, the leadership of the Democratic Party represents the corporate establishment in this country. Trump has, parts of the corporate establishment, but mainly he's a wild card, and they don't feel comfortable with him. They don't know what he's going to do from day to day, and his response to this coronavirus crisis is a disaster. So they're going with a safe establishment candidate that's not going to rock the boat. Biden represents the status quo ante. Trump is an unknown. You don't know what he's going to do. So that's what they're going with. But, the problem for people like me is the status quo ante wasn't so great. Working class living standards have been going down. Inequality has been growing. There's been no action on climate change. We have this new nuclear arms race. The last bilateral treaty between the U.S. and Russia is going to expire next February 5th. No negotiations going on. That's why the Bulletin of Atomic Scientists moved their doomsday clock closer to midnight. So, that is an issue that no presidential candidate is talking about. I've been saying it should be a top campaign issue. How are we going to get out of this nuclear arms race? We need nuclear disarmament initiatives. Now, I'm saying the U.S. should pledge no first use, disarm to a minimum credible deterrent, get out of these 7 official wars and covert operations in over 100 countries and 800 foreign military bases, and on the basis of those tension-reducing initiatives, go to the other nuclear powers and say, we want complete and mutual nuclear disarmament. And we'd have 122 nations with us because they agreed to the text of a treaty on the prohibition of nuclear weapons in July 2017. And the International Campaign for the Abolition of Nuclear Weapons that pushed for that got the Nobel Peace Prize for that. And hardly anybody in the United States even knows that. And that's because our corporate state media won't talk about it, and none of the presidential candidates will. But I'm hoping the Green Party can put that issue on the agenda and get people talking about it, because that's an existential threat as much as the climate crisis is, or the coronavirus crisis is, or for working class people, inequality and economic deprivation is.
Well, I mean, you have a long history of marching against wars, back to Vietnam, back to all kinds of military interventions. I'm sure you were out in the streets against Reagan's support for the Contras in Nicaragua. I mean, you're a peace candidate in so many ways. But you'll have to forgive me. I do want to ask you here. There's been some back and forth about you in the media. Jimmy Dore was quite frustrated with you. He said he felt like you were pushing hostility to Russia, the Russiagate conspiracy. What is your response to some of the people that have been critical of you around that?
Well, my position on Russia is we need détente and negotiations, not escalating the Cold War, which we've been doing. Mm-hmm. That's the Democratic narrative. That's the response to whatever the Russians did in that election. And then we talked about internet censorship. That's another response. And the other response is the Russians got Trump elected. No, Hillary, the Electoral College installed Trump, even though you won the popular vote. So stop picking on the Russians or the Greens and calling our former presidential candidate a Russian asset with no basis. That's all nonsense. Jimmy Dore should talk to me. there's been a smear campaign against me. I'm the socialist in the Green Party race. There's some people that don't want that. So they drum up stuff like, Russiagate. I happen to think the Russians, like the US, intelligence secret services, do meddle in each other's affairs. It's like the Mad Magazine, the spy versus spy in the margins. That's been going on for a long time.
But hasn't it been largely debunked at this point? I mean, with the reports that have come out, and I mean, the facts just don't seem to add up. I mean, it seems to have been. I mean, they dropped the charges against the Internet Research Agency. Even, I mean, the indictment was dropped.
Yeah, they didn't want to reveal sources and methods. I think there's enough fishy stuff, enough contacts. The Mueller report is full of them. They said it's not enough to do criminal conspiracy charges and get it past the jury. But I think the way Mueller left it is Congress should investigate. I mean, I'm mad at Mueller because he didn't indict Donald Jr. and Manafort and those people for the Trump Tower meeting. Just going to that meeting expecting to get dirt from foreign nationals, whether they were from the Russian government or just Russians, is against the law. And Mueller said, well, they didn't know. Tell that to Crystal Mason, the black woman who thought she could vote, did a provisional ballot, and got sentenced 5 years in Texas. Ignorance of the law was no excuse for her, but apparently is for these rich white men. So, I got a lot of beef with Mueller, but it's not that I think he found nothing. It's that what was found is inconclusive. I don't think a lot of the stuff that's happened or did happen, I think more will come out. So, I think, Russia was doing something. Hillary's worried about Putin. She's mad at Putin. Well, she should talk to her husband. Because her husband helped get Yeltsin, saved his bacon back in '96 when he was in single digits. He sent campaign operatives and got him an IMF loan so they could get the economy up some. And Yeltsin got reelected. Well, guess who Yeltsin appointed as his successor? Vladimir Putin. So Hillary's barking up the wrong tree.
Let me ask you, didn't Hillary Clinton also, collude with Ukrainian elements? Wasn't she also involved with them trying to get dirt on Trump and during the election?
I don't know about dirt on Trump. She was meddling in Ukrainian politics. Mm-hmm. I think Ukrainians many of them rose up against corruption, and they've done it through successive regimes. But the U.S. was in there pushing their faction. Mm-hmm. And the Russians pushing their faction. It's another case where covert operations on both sides were in the middle of it. And she was in the middle of that. She was escalating the Cold War. Yeah. The other thing you're saying, I don't know of.
Okay, well, let me ask you also, you're very opposed to regime change wars. Where do you stand on Venezuela?
This is one of the problems with the Democratic Party. Very few of the Democrats in Congress oppose Trump, the sanctions and we're just getting reports on covert actions recently to try to do a military coup. It's none of our business. It's up to the Venezuelans to choose who their leaders are. And if anything, we should be reducing the sanctions right now in this coronavirus crisis, so they can get the aid and trade they need to help deal with that problem.
Now, what about Iran? Where do you stand on the Iran nuclear deal?
We should have stayed in it. That was, I give Obama credit for that. In fact, there were periods when they were getting reports, like the Russians got some documents from the NSC and some other agency. And so the National Security Council was telling Obama, you got to slap back hard. And Obama said, no, we do the same thing. And we're trying to get this Iran deal done. That's where diplomacy and detente can make a difference. And Trump pulling out, that just set up the situation we're in right now. And that's very dangerous. Back in January, I mentioned the tactical nukes, or maybe I didn't, but, part of the nuclear modernization program is to put more tactical nukes into conventional forces. We had a new tactical nuke deployed in our warships outside Iran back in January when there was that, crisis after General Soleimani, if I got his name right, that was his name. Soleimani got assassinated by a drone strike. What if Trump had got out the wrong side of bed that morning? Mm-hmm. Who knows? We're in an extremely dangerous situation. The same thing with Iran. It's up to the Iranian people to decide their leadership, and we got to deal with the leadership they got right now in order to try to reduce tensions. And the problem with Iran, also Russia is, they're major fossil fuel producers like the United States is. If we're going to go to a Green New Deal, those countries are going to need help transitioning to a post-fossil fuel world. That's what we should be talking about. I mean, my basic approach is the U.S. should be the world's humanitarian superpower instead of its global military empire. We should be making friends and not enemies, offering help with a global Green New Deal so we can get into the 21st century clean energy and provide for basic needs of everybody.
Now, do you feel the same way about Syria, that we should stop meddling in Syria's internal affairs and let the Syrians pick their own government?
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay, great. Well, I guess before we conclude, I guess looking ahead to the campaign season, how many votes do you expect to get? Do you think this will be a good year for the Green Party?
I think we have a real opportunity because of the ineptitude of Trump and the invisibility of Biden. And to the extent the Democrats have put forward relief packages, it's not adequate to protect working people and small businesses. We need job protections, income protection, housing protection, healthcare protection. We need OSHA standards. If we're going back to work, we got personal protective equipment. None of this is being done. So there's a total vacuum there. And hopefully, we will get heard and we'll put our demands forward and people will respond. And I think the sky's the limit because there's such a political vacuum there.
Now, do you think that the country's, mindset and consciousness is going to be deeply changed by coronavirus? Like, how do you see the political mind of Americans shifting post-coronavirus?
I think it's going to shift because people are going to see that the response we've gotten is not up to the task. I'm afraid this coronavirus, people have happy talk about how we're going to get, people will develop immunity. This part of coronavirus family, which includes common colds and SARS-1 and natural immunity, hasn't developed for those coronaviruses. Same with vaccinations. It's not so easy to get a vaccination, particularly with coronaviruses. This may be around for a long time, and the government is not ready to transition to the kind of health protection we need, the kind of work environment we need, and economic recovery. Right now, most businesses, small businesses, had less than a month worth of cash reserves. It's been a month since we locked down. They're going out of business. And with them, half the jobs in the country are with small businesses. What's the program to get the economy going again? I would say it's the eco-socialist Green New Deal I'm talking about. We need to rebuild all our production systems for clean energy, zero waste, so we're not filling the world with plastics and toxics. And that can keep a lot of people busy, over the next decade, rebuilding our economy on a sustainable basis. But the two parties, they're just doing stopgap measures and responding to their paymasters, to corporate America. The big businesses are getting bailed out. Wall Street's going back up because the Fed, unleashed all this liquidity. And that's not helping people like me, people that work for a living. I'm a retired Teamster now, but I know what people are going through. I'm still talking to the guys I work with. Some of them are getting sick. They don't have the personal protection equipment. And they're out here, they call them essential workers. Another way to look at them is sacrificial workers. Mm. So there's a lot to be done.
Now, if you could say anything to the people in Michigan, in Ohio, and different states that are protesting right now, getting support from Trump, calling for an end to the social distancing, what would you say to them? What would be your message to those folks?
You need to look at the science and deal with reality. Fantasies are not going to help us. And the idea that this is just the flu, that it's a hoax or whatever they think, they gotta face reality, or reality is going to face them, and it's not going to be pretty.
All right. Well, thank you very much, Howie, for your time. I really appreciate it. You're Howie Hawkins. You're the front runner for the Green Party nomination. I really appreciate you taking the time to talk to us. We'll be posting this shortly. All my best wishes to you.
Thank you. I enjoyed the conversation.
Sure thing. Thanks.
All right.